I'd be intrigued to know whether anyone has ever had one of these mechanics trolleys delivered and it not have some sort of damage to it. So those of you that have watched the channel for a while will remember in the old house before we moved here, I used to have a tool wall which I kind of cobbled together. Actually, it wasn't really done in a way that was really very well thought out. So when we moved here and I had the plans for the workshop end, I really wanted to have a tool wall and really think it through. Now there's a really good reason for me wanting to do this, is because in the past all my bikes have been bikes that I've always been able to work on. I've built loads of bikes myself, or built them up I should say, not the frames, but always been able to do the work myself, because really up until fairly recently they've all been very similar, all kind of mechanical with rim brakes, and that's something that I've been working on for 30 odd years. Whereas obviously recently it shifted over to Di2 a bit more. My TT bike and my good road bike are both Di2. Now actually, in all honesty, that makes life a lot easier, but one of the biggest things that's new to me is working on hydraulics. I don't know anything about hydraulics, and obviously all the things that go with that, rim brakes. So it's something that I want to learn about and be able to get my head and hands around. Obviously now I've making this videos about kind of tools and stuff, been doing a little bit of digging on YouTube, and it seems like most of the videos that have been done on kind of building bike tools and stuff are mountain bikers, because their bikes are so much more complex, but our road bikes are heading in that direction as well with the hydraulics and disc brakes. So that's the main plan for me. I want to learn about these things, I want to experiment and try and get a bit better at those elements of bike mechanics that I don't know anything about. So you can't have a tool wall without having a tool bench. Now I'd like to say that I'm very ecologically minded and I like recycling and stuff, but actually most of the reason for me reusing and recycling stuff is A, cost, and secondly, I'm completely impatient. So I built this tool bench out of an old door that was left by a previous occupant. There's another one over there in the corner, and that was the starting point for building the rest of what we've got behind me. So then once I've built the bench, on top of that I put some rubber matting, which my mechanic friend Robin always insists on having, because things don't dent or break or bounce when they hit them, and it also gives you a little bit of purchase to lean on it. And then I put a plywood, well, what we used to call in the kitchen trade splashback, but something that's going to be eventually wood sealed and kind of gives you a back to it rather than the tools coming down to the bottom. And then the pegboard on top of it. So with the tool wall this time I've decided to go down the route of using pegboard, and the reason for that is more or less like I've been saying earlier about the hydraulics and stuff. Things are changing rapidly with bikes, and different tools are going to be needed, and things are going to change as time goes on. So what I wanted to do was have something that was very adaptable, hence the pegboard. So there are two main spaces for me to keep my tools in here. One obviously is the pegboard, the other is a small toolbox on the top, and there's another one, a bigger one on wheels underneath the work surface, and I'll talk about those in a bit of detail as to what I put where in a second. But let's talk about the layout of the pegboard, because this is something that I did a bit of research in, and I'm going to go through it with you now. There are essentially two things you want to be thinking about. One is top and bottom of the pegboard, and one is left and right of the pegboard. So what we have to start with, if you think about top and bottom, you want to be thinking about the tools that you use the least often at the top and the tools that you use most often at the bottom. So that makes perfect sense, obviously. Then left to right, well, if you think about me working on the bike as it stands at the minute like this, I've got the handlebars this side and I've got the cassette end this side to my left. So what I want to be able to have really are the tools that I want for the bit where the bike's going to hand. So essentially what I've got in the middle here are the things I need for the middle of the bike, and the things that I've got down this far end are the things that I need for the back of the bike. There's not a huge amount going on at the front of the bike here, apart from handlebar stuff, so I put the things that I need maybe for working on the handlebars towards the front of the left-hand side of the pegboard. So you've got a mixture of generic tools as well as specific tools when you're working on a bike. Obviously you've got screwdrivers, you've got your hex wrenches, you've got your Allen keys, torque wrenches, pliers, but then we have the more specific bike tools as well that we have to consider. So the tools that I've got in the middle of the toolboard, like I said earlier, are the tools that I need for the middle of the bike. So I've got things such as paddle spanners, bottom bracket tools, all the kind of chain tools, cable cutters, those kind of things that I'll be using for the middle section of the bike along this bit here. And then over to the right hand side of the board, we've got the things that we'll need for the back end of the bike. So we've got cassette tools, chain whips, those kind of things that we need for working on cassette and the back end of the wheel. On the far right, and I'm not talking politically here, on the far right of the tool wall, we've got the things that we kind of hopefully will use the least, things like bearing presses, different types of hammer, files, weighing scales, specific things like the tools for taking off the power tap covers and those kind of things. So thinking top to bottom, obviously things like your hex wrenches and your screwdrivers and pliers and things like that are all to hand down here right in front of you when you're working. And then obviously the more specific kind of more esoteric tools going along the top here. So in this top toolbox here, I keep some really bike specific stuff, spares and repair kits that are really generically for bikes really. So we've got all the oils and lubes and things like that you need to hand, plus also your gloves, pens, pencils. Then in the drawers we've got stuff like batteries, lights, CO2, tubes, brake pads, cables, zip ties, Di2 charger, that kind of stuff. And then underneath you've got this big toolbox on wheels under here. Now what I keep in here are all the kind of tools that you need to have but you don't use very often. So things like spanners, wrenches and sockets, yes we're going to need those, but we don't use them very often on bikes these days. And then underneath in the big section I've got things like my Dremel, heat gun, glue gun, grinders, all the stuff I need to do to wax a chain. Also one of the other cool things about this is that I can pull it out and put some tools on top, put it next to the bike to have everything to hand. So last couple of little features, little pen light to be able to get into those little dark areas, although it's really important to have some really good light in the workshop, so that was one of the things I put in first. These little magnetic strips, really useful for putting the tools that you're using or things like your little pick set on. You can get them from IKEA. And finally, probably one of the most important things for a mechanic to have in their workshop is a blue roll dispenser. So this is a work in progress. The whole building is really, there's still quite a lot of work to do on it, but this thing will hopefully be a place where I can learn about some of the skills that I'm less comfortable with at the minute, particularly featuring hydraulics and bleeding brakes and setting up disc brakes and changing pads and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to exploring that journey with you guys on the channel in this area of the workshop. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please hit the notifications bell below, leave a comment, give me a thumbs up, and I will see you on the next video.